President Clinton.
I can be brief. This panel's too good to delay. Let me just make a couple of observations. First of all, I agree with what Tony Blair said, but I particularly appreciated the letter that I read the other day that Bill Gates wrote, saying that we can't stop dealing with these problems just because the economy's in crisis. Keep in mind, the interdependent world is still pretty good to us, otherwise we couldn't afford to be here. I mean, we got planes at Davos parked as far away as Milan. So there are those among us who are not starving. And therefore, those of us who can do more, even in this time, should. Those of us who have to do less should do what we could, should do what we can. But the central challenges of this world are that it is unequal, it is unstable, and it is unsustainable. The unstable part is obvious. That's what we're living through. We're living through this in part, I think, because it's unequal. We made, in the United States, too much of our growth went to too few people, and it was on a very narrow base of housing, finance, and consumer spending, and it started the unraveling which we are living with. And if anybody who thinks that we can ignore climate change because times are tough must have missed the report last week of the international scientists that said, whoops, we thought if we cut greenhouse gas emissions by 80% by 2050, we could normalize the planet within 100 to 200 years, but we forgot about how slow the oceans work. It'll be 1,000 years before the average temperature of the Earth begins to cool, even if we have an 80% reduction. In other words, all the stuff that we've been talking about all these years is still relevant, and I would argue more relevant. Now, what are we supposed to do with the fact that, there's not as much money? I went out of my way with my foundation not to try to get, the Gates Foundation has been a great partner. I'm profoundly grateful, but I don't raise a lot of money from other donor foundations. So I was particularly hard hit this year when wealthy individuals lost a lot of their money. And thankfully, I'd saved a little money for an endowment so we didn't have to close any of our AIDS work. But this is a challenge for everybody. My observations are as follows. Number one, we have to prioritize, and keeping people alive is the first priority. Second priority should be promoting economic growth among the poor. And Muhammad Yunus will say more about that, I'm sure, but when President Obama's stimulus program passes, I hope a percentage of it will be devoted to the poorest parts of the United States, because you'll get more growth for less money, and there are actually places in our country which, if this investment is done right, will be better off after it's done than they were before the crisis hit. And it's true all over the world. Number two, we should look at health, as I said. Number three, even big organizations funded by wealthy people should try to broaden their donor base. My friend Jet Li here, as far as I can determine, was the first Asian ever to develop a broad-based giving program, and he's had at least 1 million, maybe more, people in Asia contribute to his philanthropic work. In a region of the world that didn't have a big civil society tradition. So I want you to listen to all of them. I just want to distill from what Tony said the meaning of the NGO world in the 21st century is to me. When I was in government, people used to ask, what are you going to do and how much money are you going to spend on it? And even now, in much of the debate yesterday in the House of Representatives, it was, what are you going to do and how much money are you going to spend on it? I think the far more important question, and the question that obsesses me now every day, whether I'm dealing with AIDS or malaria or healthcare, is how are you going to do it? The role of civil society, I would argue more than anything else, the reason Muhammad Yunus won the Nobel Prize finally is because he answered a how question. The reason the Gates Foundation is important beyond all the money that Bill and Melinda have put into this is that every day they try to answer the how question. And I don't think that there's any way that the private sector acting on its own or government acting on its own will ever be able to answer those how questions. That's our job. That's the third sector of this economy. And even if we don't have as much money, we need to remember what business we're in. And it's more important now than ever before, the how. Thank you.